Well, and the women dress very in form-fitting clothes.
Yeah, very tight.
And that's just what they do. And I believe your mother, the woman in the house you were saying, complained about you, right?
I don't know that she complained, but I think after a while it became pretty clear to Tim that she wasn't comfortable with me and she didn't really like having me there. And so I just moved in with some other women. And then right before I left, they told me that because I didn't want to talk to them about Jesus, that I must be possessed by the devil. But that was just the interesting thing that happened. They're very evangelical, and it wasn't that I had any problem with that. It just that I didn't want to get into the whole reason that I wasn't Christian or whatever at that point, and especially when I'm trying to talk to them in a second language. Let's see, what do we have after this? Oh yeah, so this is after I graduated from college. So yeah,
This is Campbell.
Yeah, this is Campbell. This is definitely Campbell phase. Again, my face is not aged, but at this point, I was just basically identifying. I'd kind of gotten rid of the lesbian category and just kind of said, well, I'm not really anything. I'm not guy. I'm not girl. And that came about actually because I did a co-op just after the Dominican Republic co-op at Dyke TV in New York City, which is a television program, a public access TV station made by, for, and about queer women. That was, at least at the time, that was like their mission statement. And we were having conversations as an organization about, who falls into that category of queer women. Does it include trans men who were born with female bodies? Does it include trans women who were born with male bodies and identify as female? And through that, I had conversations with my coworkers about what it meant to be transgender. And that was the first time that I really looked at myself and asked, how do I really feel inside? And I wasn't sure at that point. I was sort of looking around at sort of the options that I could see for how I identified, and I just knew I wasn't a woman. I wasn't sure of anything else, but I knew I wasn't a woman, and I figured if I wasn't a woman, I probably couldn't be lesbian. And I also thought Pierce Brosnan was pretty hot, so so at that point I just kind of threw my hands up and I said, forget it, I'm just not even going to try to figure this out. I'm just going to be me, and that's where I was at for several years. But at the same time, I never really stopped thinking about it.
And I was seeing, like in this picture, I was seeing more of particularly male clothing show up.
Mm-hmm.
And you would, when we were talking on the phone, you would talk about, well, I went out with such and such and I passed all night, just thinking, sounded like at that time you were doing it for fun, just to see if you could pass as a guy.
Yeah.
And it, so I was never thinking that a sex change, it just didn't occur to me at this time. I just saw this experimentation. And I do remember you described to me, well, the best way I can describe it is I'm genderqueer.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time I had just an awful reaction to the Q word, just kind of like I have to the N word. I learned it was a bad thing to call people.
Well, and it is, and some people are still really uncomfortable with it, but it's also been reclaimed by a lot of people within the community, and I think for a lot of people, myself included, it's become just shorthand for I don't know what I am, but I don't fit. So.
And so this picture probably represents some of that stage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the times that you were talking about, I dated a couple of trans men later in college, in my last year of college, And I do remember one night that all three of us went out for dinner, and all night the waitress just addressed us all as sir and gentlemen, and we just never bothered to correct her. Because it wasn't really correcting her. I mean, it was just...
So where do we go next?
Next we go to, this is, so after I graduated from college, I moved to Michigan, and, I was still questioning, and I was becoming more, I wasn't, sexually active is not the right word, but I was in situations where I was physically intimate with people in a non-sexual way. And that's when I started really discovering how uncomfortable I was with my body, because I would get in that situation, and I had learned, as you can kind of see in the pictures, to present masculine with my clothing and to kind of look like a guy, and I was comfortable with that, and I could move through the world that way and be more or less okay. But when it came to intimacy, like as soon as my clothes were off, I felt like I wasn't myself anymore, and I felt like the people I was with couldn't see who I was. Like I didn't have any way to express that without my clothing. And, that and just right about... It was right about the time of Hurricane Katrina. I remember, just because it happened to coincide with a trip I made. I asked some of my friends to start using male pronouns because I was just curious to see how it felt. And what was interesting about that was, at first, I was really uncomfortable with it. Not in a, this doesn't fit me way, but in an, I don't deserve this way. Like I didn't feel worthy. And it wasn't about, it wasn't a sexist thing. It wasn't about men being better than women. It was just about, I think I'd spent so long learning not to be this that to try to claim it felt like I was doing something, I don't know. It's really hard to explain, but it just felt really uncomfortable for a while. But somehow I never said stop. I never said don't do this. And then gradually I got used to it. And then it got to the point where, with my friends all calling me he, whenever somebody who didn't know about this experiment called me she, I was kind of like, that's wrong. Like, stop that. And that took until about 2007. And I go out dancing at a club most weekends when I'm home, just because I love to dance. And there were a couple of things about that affected me. One was that somehow when I was dancing, I felt whole. I can't explain exactly how it works, but I just felt whole, and I didn't feel, it was like my body wasn't, like even when I still had breasts, I wasn't aware of them when I was dancing. And also, there would just be guys shirtless dancing, and I would just be looking at them going, ah.
You wanted to take your shirt off and dance?
I wanted to take my shirt off, but it wasn't just, and again, it wasn't a double standard thing. It wasn't women should be able to take their shirt off too, although I believe that. But it was if I take my shirt off, I don't look like that. It was definitely, I was becoming aware of my body being not right. And
that was the way you wanted to look.
Yeah. And it was just so that into 2007, and then I also had a really painful relationship in there that ended very badly, and over the summer of 2007, I was just emotionally just on a roller coaster and having panic attacks and just angry a lot. I would just have fits of rage, just kind of for no reason. And I work at a library, and so I spent a lot of time in the stacks when I was supposed to be working, actually reading books about trans issues. But I was also just every day in my head, am I going to transition? Am I not going to transition? Am I going to transition? Am I not going to transition? Just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it just got to the point that I was so miserable that I was finally willing to sort of look outside myself for help. And I drew on a technique that Mom had taught me to kind of try to heal myself and calm myself down. And looking back on it now, I can see that it was basically just sort of a form of prayer, like, you know, reaching out, saying, please help me. And interestingly enough, after I did that for a brief period, I just kind of woke up one day and I knew I was going to transition. And I talked to my therapist about it a couple days later, and then I called Mom and Dad and told them, and
Now, had you been aware of the panic attacks and the rage and all of that?
I'd been aware of a lot of the emotions, yes. We had long phone calls.
yeah.
And so I was aware of how miserable you were. I didn't know why you were so miserable.
Mhm.
You hadn't, I just didn't know. I felt helpless. It was tough. And then when he said he was going to transition, we met. He called and told us that on the phone 2 days before we were going to see him, so that we had some advance notice. And we met and we drove to Colorado for my niece's wedding, and talked about what all this means. And I cried. And I've cried a lot at different times. So, some of them are tears of loss, a lot of, at the beginning in particular. Even though, I'd seen the pictures, like that picture of the suit, of the young man in the suit, that was still my daughter in my mind. And I liked having a daughter. I did not, so letting go of the idea that I had a daughter was hard. And even with all of that, there was never this is wrong, you shouldn't do it.
No, there wasn't. And
I mean, I didn't feel it. It wasn't there.
yeah.
This is your life, and I want you to be the best you can be, whatever that is.
Mm.
And I liked having a daughter. I also like having a son, so let's be straight about that. But again, it was my protective stuff that came in. What are people going to say? Are they going to reject you? I've asked you many times to take martial arts courses, and you haven't done it.
I still want to.
Because I'd like to know that you can protect yourself if you need to. And, well, you can talk about how the family's been. That's better. They've been wonderful, but that's... and then I'll finish up with how it is kind of for me now.
Okay. Do we have a time limit, or we go on
Let's see.
anything?
We're about 45 minutes into it, and so
Okay. It's not as bad as I
we'd
thought
like,
it might be.
Yeah, well, wanted to give people time for questions, so I think we're sort of on time.